Hi, welcome back to the channel. So 25 years ago, something destructive, something violent happened. But also at the same time, something peaceful and amazing. This is something that I've kept within myself for all these years. And I'm being called to share it with anybody that wants to listen. So come on inside, we'll have a seat, and I'll tell you my story. It was Memorial Day weekend, the year was 2000. And our daughter's birthday had just been a couple weeks before. So that Saturday, we took a trip to the National Zoo. We had a great time. It was pretty crowded. I remember my daughter just loved the giraffes. That was her favorite. She had just turned 3 years old, and that was her wish for months and months before her birthday was to go to the zoo. So we spent all day Saturday there, and the following morning, we were all getting ready for church, and I'd gone out to the car with her bag, toys, the little book that she liked to read during church. And this calming female voice came into my head, and it told me to check the car seat. So with the trip the Saturday before, I did notice that the seat had come loose a little bit. I'm not sure how the car seats are nowadays, but 25 years ago, they had a base, and then you had the actual seat that would clip into the base. And this went with the booster seats as well. It had a base, and then you put the booster seat in that, and that's what our daughter was in at the time. So I took the booster seat out, I checked the base, and it was a little loose. So I tried to strap it in tight, and it did not seem right to me. So I unstrapped it, I rearranged it, and this time I actually pretty much half sat in it with my knees, pushing it down, and strapped it tight. And it was in rock solid. Slipped the booster seat in, we were good to go. But all morning, I just had this feeling of numbness. Not really dread, but just numbness. Like everything around me just felt numb. I really didn't think much of it. I just kind of shrugged it off, but I did notice that. So on the way to church, and the speed limit goes from 35 to 50, and we're following a van. And we get to the point in the road where that transition between 35 miles per hour and 50 miles per hour is taking place. And I notice the van swerving hard to the right and then swerving hard to the left. I instinctively pushed the brakes and the clutch at the same time, and I'm steering to the right to miss this van, who is now swerving sideways into the road going across the center median line. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this car bouncing off of the bank on the opposite side and heading directly towards us. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen any movie where something tragic or something traumatic is about to happen, and right before then, they slow everything down, so everything's in slow motion. This is exactly what happened to me. I saw the car coming directly at me, and I'm still swerving to the right. I got both legs pushed to the floorboard with the clutch and the brake, and I can see this lady's face. I can see the expression on her face. I can see her slowly coming towards me. And just in an instant, I just heard a loud crash. I felt all the breath just go out of me. And it was instant darkness. I don't know how long I was out. I remember coming to, and I heard our daughter in the back seat. She was screaming. And I happened to look over at my wife, who was 7 months pregnant. And she had this big lump on her head. She was a little bit slumped over, and she was moaning. And I don't know, I think I passed out again. And I came to again, and I hear a lady's voice outside the door, and she's screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God." And out of the corner of my eye, I could see that she had gotten our daughter out of the car, and she was still screaming. And my daughter kept asking her, "Why does my daddy have blood on his tie?" I remember a fellow had come up to my side. He was asking me my name. I don't even know if I told him right. I'm assuming I did. Then I was out again. When I came to again, the paramedics had arrived. I heard the sirens, and I think that's what had jostled me awake. And I just remember telling them they were trying to get the passenger door open to get my wife out. And I just remember telling them, just please save my wife. She's 7 months pregnant. And they said, we're going to get her out now. And I happened to look down, and I could see my feet past the airbag. And I felt this pressure on my left leg. So I looked down, and all I could see was the bone was sticking out about 3 inches. It had ripped through my skin, ripped through my pants, and blood was just rolling out. This was my left femur bone. It snapped basically right in half, halfway up. I really didn't have any pain at the moment. And I noticed that they did get my wife out. Another paramedic and a fireman had come over, and they just told me to be still, that they had to take the jaws of life to cut me out of the car. I blacked out again, and I came to with the sound of a chainsaw. It sounded like a chainsaw, but I'm assuming that was the jaws of life were cutting the windshield out, cutting the door off, cutting the supports out, cut the steering wheel away from my leg that had been pushed down against my leg. And once they did that, the pain instantly came, and I looked down, and the blood started coming out even faster. The windshield was now gone. The door was gone. I could hear them talking amongst themselves what was the best way to get me out. And I happened to look out from what was once the windshield to the other side of the road, and I could see some of my family, some of my in-laws, and it was so blurry, but right behind them, I saw this light. It was a yellow glowing light, sort of like that you would see on top of a candle. And it just got bigger. And the paramedic, I could hear him say, "You have to get him out of here. He has 15 minutes. And at that moment, that light that was behind my family and my in-laws was inside the car. And I could hear this female voice, and it was the same voice as I heard earlier that morning. And it said, "Hold on, your daughter and your son need you." And this light moved over to my left to where my bone was sticking out of my leg, and I felt this pressure. And I looked, and this light had this little appendage that had came out of it, and it was pushing on the wound where the blood was coming out. So they started to extract me from the car, and they put me on the ground on a gurney. I don't know what it was. And I remember a fireman at my feet, 2 firemen at my feet, and 2 up at my shoulders, and they said, "We have to put your leg back in place, and this is going to hurt." And I just remember saying, "Just do what you have to." This light was still there. It had got out of the car with me and was still there. And I remember being pushed down on my shoulders and my right leg, and then this excruciating pain as they pulled my leg 3 or 4 inches to get it set so they could put some kind of a strap or something. I don't know what they put on it, a splint, I'm not sure. And I passed out from the pain from that. The next thing I remember is hearing a helicopter and being rolled across a field to this helicopter. I don't remember much. I don't remember taking off. I came to, and I don't know how far away from the trauma center that we were. I came to, and there was a fellow at my head and one at my feet. And I could hear them talking amongst themselves. He doesn't have much longer. And I tried to look at my leg. I couldn't. I had so much pain. Now there was so much pain on my left side. Not so much as my leg, but my left side. And I happened to look to my leg again the best I could, and the light was still there, and that appendage was still sticking out of the light onto where the bone had come through my leg. I do remember landing and being wheeled into the trauma center. They were asking me a bunch of questions. I don't even remember what they were asking me. If I answered, I don't remember. I do remember them talking about I was going to get an MRI, some other procedures done. And then the doctor, the orthopedic surgeon, he came over and he said, "Robert, you're going to lose your leg." And I knew it was bad. And I remember telling him, you know what's best, just do what you have to do. And he's looking at me. And at that moment, this light appeared behind him. This light appeared behind him, and that same appendage touched his shoulder. And he looked at me and he said, I'll do the best I can. I remember being in the MRI. I don't know. It was a tunnel. I remember some shaking. I remember signing some kind of form. I don't even know how I signed it. I think I just scribbled something on it. I don't even remember how I even did that. And then I don't remember anything. And 2 days later, I woke up to two nurses talking, and my heart was racing. And they were talking amongst themselves that I needed to have a transfusion. I don't remember that happening. And I woke up. It was almost another day later. I woke up, and my dad had come in, and he had been there the whole time, but he had gone home. He needed to take care of Mom because she had some health issues. He was there for a while. Everything was still really hazy. And at that point, I was asking how our daughter was, how my wife was, how was the baby, and they just told me everything is fine. They're all fine. My wife had been treated at the local hospital for her head trauma and a broken elbow, and they decided to transfer her down to shock trauma where I was, and they actually put her in the room beside of me. I remember she kept getting up out of bed, wandering the halls. She had no idea what she was doing. She had no idea where she was. She didn't know who I was. I even remember I saw her get out of her bed, wander down the hall. She walked into my room, threw the sheet off, threw my gown off. I'm just laying there, stark naked, and she's just looking me over. And she said, "Wow, you really are in bad shape." I'm hitting the call button for the nurse's station, and I was telling them, "Look, she's out wandering the halls again. She's supposed to be staying in her bed." So they did get her back over there. Then the surgeon had come in. He explained to me that I needed another 4-hour surgery for more broken bones in my lower right leg, that I had been in surgery for 13 hours, and he didn't want to put any more stress on my body. It was already stressed as it was. That he was able to save my leg. I have a ton of titanium in me. So it was a compound fracture, and they actually had to take a rod inside the bone to connect the two pieces with a big plate across that. And then the upper leg had basically, the rest of the femur had basically spiral fractured the whole way up to my hip bone, where the femur turns into the ball and goes into the socket of your hip. That was snapped. They had to put a 3 or 4 inch. It's a big screw. I still have everything in me. You had to put a big screw in that. All the ribs on my left hand side were either broken or fractured. I had a lacerated spleen. I had a broken left wrist and a broken right ankle and tibia. So I went in for surgery for my lower leg. The day before I was released, they let my wife go home. And I was in there for another day and a half. And I remember the nurse came in and she said, look, we're going to release you today and we're going to send you to a rehabilitation hospital. And I asked her, where's that? It was about 3 hours away from home. And I said, absolutely not. My daughter needs me. My wife needs me. I'm not going to be away from them. And she said, sir, you can't do anything for yourself. Well, nobody tells me that I can't do anything. So I asked her to wheel the wheelchair over, and I said, if I get out of this bed on my own into this wheelchair, will you reconsider? And she said, if you can get yourself out of this bed into that wheelchair, we will let you go. So I scooted myself to the edge of the bed. My right leg I was able to get over. My left leg I had to lift it with my arms and swing it over. And I was able to use my upper body strength to lower myself down into the wheelchair. And she was stunned. And she said, well, it looks like you're going home. So my wife was staying at her parents'. They needed to keep an eye on her. As I wasn't able to, I was bedridden. So I went home to my parents, and our daughter was staying with her cousin and her aunt. So 4 or 5 weeks went by, and I started getting stronger. I was able to get into my wheelchair, and I think it was at the 6-week mark. I had to travel back down to the shock trauma and kind of just go over everything. The surgeon wanted to have an update. He wanted to look over everything. He wanted to ask how I was doing. And so we get down there, and he walked in, and he's looking over everything, and he said, you know, you're lucky. You don't know how lucky you are. He said, I don't know how I was able to save your leg. I wasn't even supposed to be working that Sunday. That he and his wife were planning a vacation and their flight was canceled or was postponed, delayed, whatever, till later that day. And the surgeon that was on call for that day was sick. Come to find out, he at the time was the best orthopedic surgeon this side of the Mississippi. And he told me, he said, look, I put a lot of effort into fixing you, and you are so young, and I know that you're very ambitious, and you're going to want to get up and do things. He said, but please don't mess up my work. I promised him I wouldn't. And I was supposed to go back then, I think at the 3-month mark. When I went back home, I was able to get stronger. I was able to now get around using a walker. And it was a couple weeks before my wife went into labor. And I told my parents, I'm like, I'm so grateful that you let me stay here, but I really need to get back home and get things ready for our daughter, my wife, and our baby. They reluctantly let me go. I was able to do most things around the house to get ready. I couldn't mow or anything like that, but inside I was able to do. I was able to drive. Um, so a week before the baby was born, um, my daughter and wife were able to move back in with me. So a week later, we're at the hospital, and my wife gives birth to a boy, and the nurse is cleaning him up, and I'm standing beside my wife, and she brings our son over to me so I could hold him. And up until this point, we were really concerned about how the trauma affected him. They had to put her on a lot of medications to keep her from going into labor prematurely. And I asked the nurse, how is he? And she said, he's perfect. And I remember leaning down and kissing him on the forehead. And I happened to look up, and over the nurse's shoulder was that same light. And it didn't have a face. It didn't have wings. It was just a light, a slowly flickering light. And I just got this overwhelming sense that it was smiling at me. And the nurse said, you look like you've seen an angel. And I looked over her shoulder again, and it was gone. A few weeks after our son was born, I wanted to stop by the fire station and thank the first responders that had helped get us out of there and truly saved my life. And I stopped in. I was still using my walker, and one of the fellows had come out, and he noticed me right away. He shook my hand and he said, it's great to see you up and around. And we walked in. A couple of them were there. Some weren't. It wasn't their shift. It wasn't their day to work. But the chief came over and he said, your daughter is so fortunate that you had that car seat professionally installed. If not, she would have flown through the windshield. She did have a slight brush burn here from the impact, and the seat cracked, but she was safe and sound other than a small little brush burn. If it wasn't for that voice, I don't know what would have happened with her. I've kept this to myself for 25 years. I don't know why. I'm a very private person, and it's very personal. But something told me that my story needs to be shared to anybody that wants to hear it. And so I'm sharing it with you. Was that an angel I saw? Up until the day my son was born, I wasn't sure. But when I saw that light there behind that nurse that day, I knew that's what it was.